I still remember the exact shade of the sky when I first saw the sign that read, "Welcome to Haven." It was dusk, and the clouds hung heavy like bruises, casting long shadows over the winding coastal road. The sea to my left shimmered under the dying light, vast and indifferent. It was supposed to be a solo getaway, a break from city life, a reset. But from the moment I turned onto the narrow road leading to the hotel, something in my gut whispered, "Turn back." Haven isn't on most maps. I found it through a barely functioning travel blog written by someone who hadn't posted in years. Hidden paradise, they called it. Cheap, quiet, untouched. The pictures looked idyllic: cliffs, crashing waves, a rustic hotel with ivy curling up its stone walls. But no one mentioned the beach nearby. The Forbidden Beach, as I would later come to know it. The hotel stood like a relic from another time. 3 stories high, weather-worn, and surrounded by bent palm trees that groaned in the salty wind. There was no grand entrance, just a squeaky wooden door and a faded sign, "The Marrow Inn." I chuckled at the name. "Charming," I muttered, pushing it open. The lobby smelled of sea salt, old books, and something faintly metallic. The lights were dim, but behind the front desk sat a woman who looked like she'd been carved from driftwood. Thin, wiry hair pulled into a tight bun, and skin like parchment. She didn't smile. She just looked at me for a long moment, then slid over an old-fashioned key on a ring. "Room 9, top floor. Don't open the window after dark," she said flatly. I blinked. Why not? Her eyes met mine for a fraction too long. "The wind," she replied. "It's strong." I didn't press it. I took the key and carried my bag up the creaky stairs. The hallway was narrow and lined with faded photographs, black and white images of the hotel from decades ago, with guests whose eyes seemed too aware, too fixed on the camera. A few faces were scratched out entirely. I felt like I was being watched even before I reached my room. Room 9 was small but cozy in an antique sort of way. Lace curtains, a quilted bedspread, and a single window that faced the ocean. From there, I could just make out the curve of the beach to the south. It looked odd, not because of its shape or color, but because there were no footprints, no birds, no signs of life at all. Just sand and rocks and an unsettling stillness. A crooked wooden sign at the edge of the cliff path pointed in its direction. Though I couldn't read it from here, I could almost feel what it said. Later that evening, I wandered down to the small tavern near the edge of the property. The bartender was a man in his late 60s with a glass eye and a permanent scowl. I ordered a drink and struck up casual conversation, trying to ask about the area. When I mentioned the beach, he stopped wiping the glass in his hand. "You don't go there," he said. "Why not?" He looked around, as if making sure no one else was listening. "The tide takes more than just the sea. That beach, it don't want you to leave once you step on it." I thought he was joking, maybe trying to spook a tourist, but he didn't smile. He leaned in closer. "There's a reason no locals stay at the Marrow. It's close to it, too close. That place was built before people knew better. Folks who sleep too near, they hear things, see things." "Like what?" "Old guests, from before. People who never checked out. You'll know them by the sand on their feet, and their mouths full of seawater." I laughed awkwardly, waiting for him to crack a grin, but he just walked away. I sat there for another minute before finishing my drink and heading back to my room. The wind outside whistling like a warning. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing creaks from the hallway, At first, I assumed it was the old building settling, but then came the soft sound of footsteps, bare, slow, wet. They stopped in front of my door. I held my breath. Knock, knock. I didn't move. My heart pounded so hard I was sure they'd hear it. Another knock, then silence. When I finally dared to look through the peephole, there was no one there. But just beyond, on the carpet, were faint, wet footprints leading away toward the stairs. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I asked the woman at the front desk about the other guests. She just looked at me and said, "You're the only one checked in." I started thinking about leaving that day. But something in me was drawn to that beach, like it had coiled itself around my thoughts. I told myself I was being ridiculous. That was just local folklore, creepy but harmless. But the footprints weren't a story. The knock on my door wasn't imagination. And when I looked out my window again that morning, there was someone standing at the water's edge, pale, still, staring up at my room. They were gone the moment I blinked. Still, I told myself I had to know. I had to see it for myself. That beach, that place no one would talk about. And so, I packed a small bag, took a bottle of water, and began walking down the path toward the forbidden sands. What happened next changed everything. The path to the beach was overgrown, almost deliberately so, like nature itself was trying to hide it. The wooden sign I had seen from my window was clearer up close, though the paint was chipped and faded. "Do not enter. Danger. Unstable cliff." I hesitated, but only for a moment. Something beyond that sign called to me. Not with sound, but with a pressure, like a whisper in my chest. Against better judgment, I stepped over the broken fence and followed the trail. I didn't make it far. Not because I was scared, but because I never reached the beach. The fog rolled in faster than it should have. 1 second the trail was clear. The next, I could barely see my own hands. The air grew heavy, damp, and saltier than before. I could hear the ocean, but it sounded distant, like it was miles away instead of just below the cliffs. Then came the laughter, soft, childish, but echoing unnaturally through the mist. I froze. "Hello?" I called out, heart thumping. Silence, then footsteps, fast, like someone running past me just out of sight. I spun around. Nothing, only fog. I backed away, heart pounding, until I found the path again and returned to the hotel. I didn't mention what I heard to anyone. Honestly, I wasn't even sure I had heard anything at all. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the bartender's words had gotten into my head. Back in my room, I noticed something strange. The window was open. I was certain I had closed it. I remembered locking it before leaving. A small breeze moved the lace curtain, carrying with it the smell of brine and something fouler, wet earth and rot. I shut the window and latched it firmly. That night I tried to sleep again. The room was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the building settling. But around 1 a.m., the lights flickered. Not just in my room. I saw it happen in the hallway too, through the gap beneath the door. A hum followed, low and steady, like something mechanical buried deep in the earth had awakened. And then the radio turned on. I hadn't even noticed a radio before, but there it was. An old dial-tuned set sitting on the nightstand. It glowed faintly and crackled with static before a voice pushed through. A woman's voice. Gentle, singing. But the language wasn't English. It was slow, melodic, and ancient sounding. Like something you'd hear from a dream you weren't supposed to remember. The volume climbed on its own. I turned it off. Less than a minute later, It clicked back on. This time, the woman wasn't singing. She was whispering, repeating one word over and over. Come, come, come. I unplugged the radio, and it kept playing. I threw a blanket over it and backed into the corner, watching as the cloth over the radio rose and fell like it was breathing. That's when the mirror above the dresser began to fog up. No heat, no steam, but a fog spread across the glass like breath. And then writing. One word drawn with a fingertip from the other side. Stay. I slept in the hallway that night, near the stairs. Even there, the feeling didn't go away. The walls felt like they were listening, like the entire building was inhaling slowly, exhaling in creaks and sighs. I thought I saw movement through the frosted window at the end of the corridor. Just a blur, but it made my skin crawl. In the morning, I tried to check out. I told the woman at the front desk that I wasn't feeling well, that something felt off. She didn't even look up from her logbook. No refunds after check-in, she said coldly. I'm not asking for one, I replied. I just want to leave. You already paid for 3 nights. I stood there, silent. She looked up. Her eyes. They didn't seem normal. Something shimmered in them, dark, glassy, almost like the surface of water. Guests who break the stay, she said softly, don't come back whole. I backed away. I went outside to get some air. That's when I realized my car wouldn't start. No click. No engine turnover. Just silence. I tried the key again and again. Nothing. When I lifted the hood, I found the battery gone. Not drained. Gone. Like it had been lifted out cleanly, with purpose. There were no other guests. No other cars in the lot. The hotel sat like a fossil, untouched by time. And I was starting to feel like I had stepped into something that didn't want to let me go. The weirdest part, I wasn't panicking. Not like I should have been. A numb calmness had started creeping into my thoughts. As if whatever was happening here wanted me docile, comfortable. The staff, if you could call them that, seemed to change subtly by the hour. I passed someone in the hallway who looked unfamiliar, too pale, too silent, and then never see them again. At one point, I caught a glimpse of someone stepping into room 3, dragging something heavy. I knocked. No answer. I looked through the keyhole. It was dark, but something moved. And I swear, it was crawling on the ceiling. I fell back, heart slamming in my chest, and when I looked again, the door was wide open, the room empty. Later that evening, I went down to the tavern again, looking for the bartender. But he wasn't there. In his place stood a woman with wet hair hanging like seaweed over her shoulders. Her clothes were soaked. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared at me as I approached the counter. I asked where the old man had gone. She opened her mouth to answer, but instead of words, seawater spilled from her lips. I ran. Back in my room, I pushed a chair against the door and closed the curtains. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the wall, knees to my chest, listening to the groans of the building around me. At some point during the night, I looked up. The mirror was fogged again, and this time, 2 handprints were pressed against the glass from the inside. The next morning, everything felt wrong. The air was thick, not just humid, but dense, like it carried weight, like it was pressing down on my lungs. The radio was shattered on the floor. I hadn't touched it. The mirror was clean again. Too clean, like it had never been touched. Like none of last night had happened. But I knew better. I wasn't safe here. I couldn't leave by car. I couldn't get help. And the hotel staff weren't human. Not entirely. Every fiber in my body told me one thing. I needed answers. And whatever was happening, it all led back to that beach. I packed my backpack with a flashlight, a bottle of water, and the only sharp object I had, a rusty corkscrew. I waited until midday, when the mist had cleared a bit, and slipped out through the side stairwell. No one tried to stop me this time. Not even the silent maid with the blank eyes, who usually lingered near the hallway. The path down to the forbidden beach was almost invisible now. Overgrown vines tangled across it like nature's last warning, but I pushed through. Every step forward felt heavier than the last. The air shifted, colder, sharper. I kept walking. Eventually the cliffs opened, and I stood above the shoreline. The beach stretched far in both directions, covered in a strange dark sand that glittered faintly, as if specks of obsidian were scattered across it. The sea beyond was unnaturally still, not a single wave, just a mirror of grey reflecting the lifeless sky. And yet, the sound of waves crashed in my ears, loud and constant, but nothing moved. I descended the narrow, spiraling trail down to the beach. Halfway, I noticed something carved into the rock walls, symbols. They weren't modern. Nothing like letters or runes, more like spirals and jagged lines, etched deep and stained dark. I touched one with my fingertips. The rock was warm, almost pulsing. I stepped onto the sand. It was cold, too cold, and soft. Not like regular sand, but like ash. My shoes sank slightly. I looked around. No birds, no crabs, no shells. Just silence and that constant echoing crash of invisible waves. Then I saw them. Footprints, not mine. Fresh, human, barefoot, leading toward the far end of the beach, where the cliffs curled inward like a jagged mouth. I followed them. The closer I got, the more distorted the beach seemed. The air shimmered slightly, like heat haze, but it wasn't warm. If anything, the cold was biting now. The footprints disappeared at the mouth of a narrow cave, half hidden by the shadows of the cliff. I should have turned around, but something deep inside me, curiosity, desperation, maybe something else, pulled me forward. Inside the cave, the walls were damp and slick with a black moss that glowed faintly. The cave narrowed, then opened suddenly into a chamber. A circle. There, in the center, was a pool of still water, perfectly round and pitch black. Around it, more of those symbols, freshly carved. And beside the pool lay items, old shoes, a broken camera, a necklace, objects lost and forgotten, offerings. As I stepped closer, the water rippled. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to, because from the darkness something rose. A face, human but not. It was pale, bloated, with empty sockets where eyes should have been. Long black hair floated weightlessly around its head, as if it was submerged though the water barely moved. It opened its mouth, and dozens of tiny teeth lined the inside like a sea creature's. It didn't speak. It only watched. And then it began to climb out. I stumbled back, heart slamming in my chest. But my feet wouldn't move fast enough. The creature dragged itself upward slowly. No splashes, no sound. Just the wet noise of flesh peeling from water. That's when I saw the others. Faces in the walls. Dozens of them, fused into the rock. Their eyes followed me, mouths open in silent screams. Some were old, their features weathered like stone. Others were fresh. One of them looked eerily like the bartender. Another, the silent maid. They weren't staff. They were trapped. A sudden pressure built in my ears, like I was deep underwater. My vision blurred, and the symbols on the floor began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. The creature hissed and lunged. I turned and ran, clawing at the rock to pull myself through the narrow cave. I don't remember how I got back to the beach. I only remember falling, sand in my mouth, lungs burning, a scream stuck in my throat. The beach was darker now. The sky had dimmed like dusk was falling, though I was sure only minutes had passed. And then I saw them again. Footprints, all around me, surrounding me. But no one was there, only the sea, watching. I ran. I didn't stop until the hotel loomed above me once again. When I reached the top of the trail, I looked back just once. And in the distance, standing at the mouth of the cave, was the figure. It hadn't followed me. It didn't need to, because it knew I had seen. And once you see Forbidden Beach, it never lets you forget. I don't know how long I sat outside the hotel, staring down at that cursed beach. My clothes were soaked in sweat and seawater. My hands shook uncontrollably, and yet a strange calm settled in my chest. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the heavy silence that blanketed everything around me. The kind of silence that usually comes after something terrible. But this time, it felt like it was just beginning. When I finally stood and walked back inside, the hotel felt different. Darker, quieter. No sounds of footsteps in the hall. No faint chatter from behind the kitchen doors. Even the flickering lights didn't flicker anymore. They just hummed steadily, casting long, unnatural shadows that followed me like watchful eyes. I made my way back to my room, but I didn't go in. I couldn't. Whatever was in that mirror, it would be waiting. I had seen its reflection. I had felt it crawling behind my shoulder. Number. I needed answers. I needed to end this. I turned and headed toward the lobby, hoping maybe, just maybe, I could find some clue, a record, a ledger, something. The front desk was unmanned, of course, but behind it, a door stood slightly ajar. I slipped inside. It was an office, old, dust-covered, and oddly untouched by time. There were stacks of guest records going back decades, yellowed with age. I rummaged through them, flipping past name after name. Some were crossed out, others had no checkout date. But then I found it. A worn leather-bound bookmarked incident log. The last recorded entry was nearly 20 years ago, and what I read chilled me deeper than anything I'd seen yet. August 3rd, 2005. Guest from room 312 found wandering shoreline. Eyes burned out. Speech incoherent. Repeating phrase, Panam, she's waiting in the pool. Guest later vanished from locked room. Second incident this month. Authorities notified. Told to close section of beach. Management advised silence. Do not speak of the mirror. Do not touch the symbols. Do not go to the cave. My hands trembled as I turned the page. There were drawings. The same symbols I had seen on the beach and in the cave. At the bottom, a warning scrawled in red ink. She marks those who see her. If you see her face, she becomes a part of you. She will watch through your eyes, waiting to return. The mirror is the door. I dropped the book. Something clicked behind me. I turned around. The manager was standing in the doorway, face pale, eyes hollow. You went down there, didn't you? He asked softly. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. His voice dropped to a whisper. Then you've brought her back. Suddenly, every light in the hotel died at once. Complete darkness. I backed up into the desk, fumbling for my flashlight. When I clicked it on, he was gone. but a trail of wet footprints led away from where he had stood. Fresh, bare. I followed. The trail twisted through the hallways, growing fainter as I passed room after room. The walls began to change. They pulsed, like they were breathing. The wallpaper peeled on its own, revealing those damned symbols beneath. The air smelled like salt and rot. My ears popped again. The footprints stopped in front of my room. Room 306. The door creaked open by itself. I stepped inside, and she was waiting in the mirror. Her face filled it now, larger than before, twisted with rage, eyes black and bottomless. Her mouth opened, and I felt the scream before I heard it. It shook the room, knocked over furniture, shattered every bulb, blood poured down the mirror like tears. I screamed back. I hurled the flashlight at the glass. It cracked, but didn't break. The reflection bled. I grabbed the corkscrew and stabbed at it, over and over, but nothing shattered. That's when I remembered the book. The mirror is the door. I took the chair and slammed it forward with everything I had. The mirror shattered, and the room collapsed into darkness. When I woke up, it was dawn. I was lying on the lobby floor. The hotel was gone, or rather, abandoned. Broken windows, rotting floors, vines crawling through every crack. No lights, no staff, dust an inch thick on everything. Had I imagined it all? I stumbled outside. The sky was clear, the air was warm again, and below the forbidden beach was gone. The cliff had collapsed long ago. No path, no sand, only rocks and crashing waves. But deep inside, I knew what I saw, what I felt. I still do, because even now, every time I look in a mirror, I see her, just for a split second, watching, waiting, smiling.